Up next is Kevin Stockvis, and Kevin is a partner at McKinsey & Company. He's met Wendy just shortly ago, and he's going to share with us why the construction industry absolutely, without exception, must climb out of its productivity rut and why it hasn't yet. An intriguing presentation. Thank you for joining us, Kevin. We appreciate it. Let's welcome him with a good, warm, curt applause. Come ahead. We can do better than this. Come on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
$30 trillion. That is what the expected supply gap in construction is expected to be by 2040 if we are not, as an industry, by the way, the people in this room, both the owners, the contractors, and everybody involved in the ecosystem, are able to improve productivity. This is a massive issue, and it impacts the livelihoods of everybody in our communities, and obviously in the role that we play within this industry. Thank you for the introduction. I'll share a little bit more about myself. My name's Kevin Stockvis. I'm not sure to what degree folks are familiar with McKinsey, but we have cover a range of services for businesses, but what I focus on is construction. So I lead our project delivery and construction service line, which is our group of assets, capabilities, people that help to make projects cost less and finish faster, working with owners and contractors. What I'm here to talk to you about today is based off of research we've done recently about construction productivity. In particular, why we need to, what the implications are of a $30 trillion construction gap, why we need to focus on productivity as a way to close that gap, and in particular, what are the things that we can think about doing in order to make improvements. So, just to start to put this into perspective, and I think this is something that many of us feel. We actually just had a great presentation on data centers and about the scale of growth that we're expected to see in that space. If you look across other industries, what we are as a society trying to do over the coming decades is massive. So over the next 10 years, we are going to try to build 800 new mines. That's 80 new mines coming into service per year. For anybody that's familiar with one of these developments, they're massive. And the amount of work that has to go in from an engineering, procurement, construction is huge. We're going to put in something like 179 gigawatts of annual capacity of power to power data centers, again, linking back to the previous presentation, but then everything to do with the energy transition and to meet the world's energy demand. This is huge. The oil and gas industry, something that some folks would think of as declining, actually, much of our research says that it won't. It's going to continue to spend $200 to $300 billion per year just to keep up with the natural decline of its existing assets. And then with transportation, long being a significant portion of construction output, we need something like $27 trillion of global investment in road infrastructure over the next 15 years. I think for many of us, we can feel this. This feels like an industry that right now is significantly stretched. Let's talk about the numbers for a little bit. So in the year 2000, we were delivering as a global economy something like $8 trillion of construction output. If you look at today, 23, 24, we were able to put out something like $11 trillion in each of those years. So that represents something like a 1.4% growth rate, roughly in line with normal inflation. Looking forward, our perspective based off of infrastructure requirements for the world is we're going to need to, by 2040, be delivering something like $16 trillion of infrastructure annually. But our current trajectory brings us short of that. Growing at the rate that we've been able to grow at over the last 20 years, we'll fall short of that by something like $2 trillion per year, or $30 trillion over that time period. To put yourself, $30 trillion, that's enough to rebuild all of the United States roads. Roads, bridges, and everything. You could actually replace all of the road infrastructure in the United States. You could fund Elon Musk's mission to Mars 300 times with $30 trillion. If we're not able to close this gap, it means that we are going to fall short on things like our net zero commitments, on the energy transition. We're going to fall short on things like infrastructure requirements, the planned projects that we have in mind in order to help improve our communities. And we're going to fall short on economic growth. Capital is ultimately the driver. We talk in terms, for businesses, in terms of return on capital. This is the starting point. And we're already seeing some examples of this. So things like we are seeing grid extensions that are stalling. We're putting in place energy assets, and we're not in a position to actually connect them into the grid because we're not able to build out the grid capacity fast enough. We're seeing public infrastructure projects already stall. So high-speed rail projects in the UK and the US, for example, that are fully stalling or rolling back. This happened, for example, where I'm from in Calgary, where we actually recently brought back a project because of productivity. Housing supply, this is something that's really important to people. We're seeing deficits across all developed economies. We use the Australian example in the slide that I have, but we feel it in all developed economies where we're not actually able to build housing infrastructure fast enough. And then in addition to that, and I find this really interesting, is strategic initiatives like onshoring semiconductor manufacturing capacity are also feeling significant delays. We're sitting in Arizona where, of course, we had the significant delays to TSMC, which was in part because of input of labor. So this is a big problem. It's a big problem for the economy, and it's something that is going to impact all of us, your families, your communities, if we're not able to somehow find a way to improve productivity. Improving productivity is not optional. So now if we think about construction output, in simple terms, it comes down to two things. One is resource deployment, so our ability to bring people in the workforce in order to deliver these projects, both from an engineering, a supplier, construction standpoint, or from resource productivity, the productivity of which those people are able to deliver output. I'm going to first talk about resource productivity, resource deployment. So a few facts here. This first one is how labor markets have evolved since the year 2000. We measured job vacancies per unemployed person in 30 advanced economies. This isn't a measure of, if you can imagine, labor market tightness. If you have more job vacancies than you have unemployment, that's a significantly tight labor market. What we've found is that the aggregate increase across these economies is something like 4.2 times. And so the job vacancies per unemployed person have, with exception of COVID, which was a drag on the amount of available positions, has massively increased the amount of job vacancies. If we zoom in on the United States, we see the same story. If we go back to 2010, we had a 12.4 million worker surplus. By the way, for many of us, we remember the time around 2010 is actually a fairly significantly inflationary period. Like a lot of infrastructure was going to the U.S. Gulf Coast, for example, and there was a lot of strain felt within the market. Actually, if we look at total economy at that time, we had a significant worker surplus. Over the last 15 years, we have added something like 14 million workers. Through population growth net of aging. But on the other hand, we have increased the number of jobs by 29 million. In the United States, at the time we did this in 2023, we actually had a employee deficit of 2.6 million people, which means if you were to clear all unemployment with job vacancies, we'd still be left with 2.6 million job vacancies in the United States. This puts an incredible amount of strain. The next way we looked at this was by industry. And this is really interesting. I think a lot of us talk in terms of, we know that we need to attract people into the construction industry for this to continue to be viable. Well, here's the problem, is that across all industries, they're actually facing the exact same problem. This is a chart of the job vacancy rate by sector, 7-country average across major industries. And if you focus in on the construction row, we have indeed increased our job vacancy rate. It's gone from something like 1% to something like 3%. But that's actually in line with all of the other industries, which means that, yes, we absolutely have to continue focusing on attracting people onto the sector, but those are going to be actions that are going to help us maintain our level of employment and our position. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of the labor side of the equation is we also look this at a sub-industry level. So getting now into the details of food prep versus installation and maintenance versus buildings and grounds cleaning. What's interesting is when you look at the underlying patterns by which where the parts of the economy that are seeing the greatest increase in job vacancies, it is disproportionately in industries that require manual labor or manual input, which is another way of saying that the current generation is preferencing away from, for example, things like skilled trades. There's obviously still a significant community of people that find it to be an important and rewarding job, but by and large, people are saying, I'm actually interested in doing other things. So this actually could create a headwind. This is something where you could say, if you continue to see that trend, it's going to be even harder for us to bring people into the industry. So I talked about a whole bunch about the resource side of things, the basic point being that we are not going to be flooded with resources to help solve our construction output problem. The only option for us to meet the demands of the economy for construction is through resource productivity. We need to do everything we can to bring people into the sector, but then what's going to be critical for us, for the people in this room, is to find a way to do our work and deliver capital more effectively. So let's dive a little bit now into the story on productivity. There's challenges here too. So I think this was mentioned during the last presentation as well, but construction productivity globally has actually been stagnant over the last 25 years. Even during times that the total economy has grown, and in terms of productivity, and other sectors like manufacturing have actually been able to significantly increase by factors of like 100%. And if we go a step further, construction productivity in the United States has actually gotten worse. So the stagnant global productivity I mentioned on the previous page is actually driven by major gains in developing economies like China, which is the red line. The blue line, which is the United States, over that same period of time, we've actually seen a decline in construction productivity. So we show this, we've gone through this analysis with owner companies, construction companies at different levels of the organization, whether it be project managers, project directors, or executives. And it's always actually a little bit interesting because it feels like we have made progress. Many of us have been working really hard to make things better over the last couple of decades. If you look on sites, there are things that are going well compared to the way that we did things previously. But if it feels like we've made progress, why hasn't it translated into the results? Why can't we now measure an increased productivity through the advancements that we've made? There's 7 things that we've come up from our conversations with construction and owners in terms of the barriers. I'll talk about it at a high level, and then I'll go into detail on a few of them. One is that technology uptake has been slow, and it's mainly been focused on control rather than productivity. This is a sector where, just generally, relative to other industries, my colleagues that serve manufacturing or agriculture or wholesale or retail, we invest less in productivity, and there's questions on whether or not we're investing in the right things. The next is we have struggled as an industry to scale improvements from one project to the entire portfolio. I know I have been. I'm sure that many of you have been on that tough project, really complex, really hard. You get to the end of the project and you think, wow, there's 100 ways that we could do this better. There's all kinds of things that we could do to improve outcomes, but what happens is that you quickly get snatched up onto the next project, and then you're in go mode again, trying to deliver that next one, and in some cases surviving. Interesting is the next one is the industry where we have seen benefits. We've passed on those results to other industries, in particular related to building materials. So this is an area, for example, that we have significantly been able to improve productivity, but it isn't residing within the owners and the constructors. The next one is tender dynamics. So we have a very interesting, unique industry structure where we have construction owners who own the outcomes of the projects, and we have the contractors that deliver it. They're not always aligned, and that can create a significant barrier to innovation. The next thing is the projects have become more complex. The share of mega projects is defined by any measure of greater than $500 million, greater than $1 billion. It's becoming an increasing share of all the projects that we deliver. And that creates additional risk and complexity that can influence productivity. We have had an inflow and outflow of workers. I talked a little bit about labor. The connectedness between the labor availability and productivity is that our retention of talent, both project management talent, but then direct talent out in the field in terms of delivery, we're struggling to some degree in order to improve the capability levels of the folks who are delivering these projects. And then the last one is, and this happens over and over again in across industries, is that timely delivery takes priority over productivity improvements. We make the trade-off that the NPV of an additional month of production, if we're able to start on time, is worth adding the overtime shift, is worth expediting the procurement, is worth all of the things that we do in order to get things done on time. So a few of those I'll just go into a little bit deeper. Tender dynamics. In some ways, this can be the root of all evil as it relates to productivity. If you think about the way our industry is structured, most projects will have an owner, and the objectives of the owner is to maximize value of the business case, which is through reducing the capital costs and improving the returns, both through timing and the amount of returns. So if you think about it, that's a group that's saying we need to get things done as competitively as possible. On the other hand, when we speak to executives in contract, and we work with contract companies as well, like the simple fact is that the objectives of those firms are to maximize the return on the resources that they've deployed to the projects. The challenge with this is you have an owner group that's saying we need to innovate over time because we need more competitiveness within our industry. And we have however, when we speak to the executives in those companies, they say, it's not my responsibility, It's not my responsibility. It's really the contractor group. They're the ones that are doing the work. Contractor group, there are incentives there, but they're not as strong, and sometimes it can result in lower levels of innovation. The next, in terms of innovation, construction spends less on IT, which can be thought of as a proxy for innovation, than any other major industry. Banking and financial services, that seems obvious. Education, pharma, life science, industrial electronics, manufacturing. These do feel different, but at the same time, it is telling that at the bottom of the list is construction. We're spending less on these in these categories than other industries. The next thing is, when we look at what construction has invested in innovation, what we see is that it is more on factors that affect the control of projects than affect the productivity directly of the construction crews. What I mean by this is, when we look at the things that have changed, some of the things that we hear from clients that have been widely adopted across projects are things like digital document and contract management, 5D building, drones, Internet of Things to track material supply. These are all very important technologies. They help project managers to control the project and make better project management decisions about how they allocate resources. But the reality is that productivity comes from the amount of steel that you're able to hang in a day, the amount of pipe that you're able to weld, the amount of meters of cable that you're able, or meters or feet or yards of cable that you're able to pull in a day. And there's just been less investment in those areas. If you go on my experience from being on construction sites right now is that the methodologies that are being used out in the field, there's definitely evolution, but in large part they are very similar to what we have been doing within this industry for a very long time. The next thing we would talk about is returns. So interestingly, construction and construction materials over time have lower returns relative to other industries. Return on investment capital in the order of 8 to 10%. Where we have seen growth in return on invested capital, which is a proxy for productivity, it's actually been more in the building products. And so the industry has not been able to capture the productivity gains that you've seen in certain parts of the value chain. So that's a lot on why this is hard. I think what's important, what you should take away from this point is that we have to improve productivity. Labor's not going to do it. If we're going to meet the needs of the economy, if we're going to make it so that this isn't painful for all of us in this room, we need to improve productivity. On the other hand, we don't have a track record over the last 20 years of being able to do so, and the current course and speed is not for us to see gains that would then close that gap. We have 5 ideas for society to turn around productivity, and this comes from speaking to, again, the project managers, project directors, owners, in some cases the craft as well, for improving productivity as a society. They're around scaling the workforce, breaking down the barriers between owner and contractor, increasing project management intensity, accelerating the adoption of tech, and delivering project over improvement. I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. So first, around capabilities. As I mentioned, there's an important point around retaining talent within the industry and then growing their skills and availability. If you think about historically the way that folks were trained on projects, it was through apprenticeship. If you were an electrician, that was through a structured apprenticeship program, but you also learned in terms of how to deliver productive outputs from the journeymen within your crews. If it was project managers, it was through apprenticeship through senior project managers and project directors on your projects. The reality is that for owners and contractors, the labor force that folks are drawing from are becoming more stretched. We are having more junior folks being put in these roles relative to what we have had in the past. And what that does is it thins out the ability for us to provide direct apprenticeship. The ability to have a senior member of your team really spend the time to coach and develop a junior member of the team. And that has massive implications. It's something that actually can spiral out of control over generations of the workforce. One of the things that we are seeing some companies do, this is an example from a utility company that we worked with who's looking to massively increase their capital delivery output. And so if you think about it, they then control the engineering and the project management. They're putting in place capability programs that are deliberate about how they train their teams. And so they're saying, for us to have a capable project manager, there's a basic set of skills that we want them to have. And this is across project development through to project controls, project management, and so on and so forth. And we're going to make sure that the junior folks within our organization receive the apprenticeship across those skills. Where in the past we would have let it happen based on our expectations of our people to train those around them, we're now going to put in place structure to make sure it happens. And so What they did was they said, there's a set of 10 skills that we feel are going to be particularly important to our program. What we're going to do is make sure that put in place a credentialing system where to be a project manager within our organization, you need to be credentialed across each of those 10 skills. And then for each of those 10 skills, put together a program, requirements around intro training, apprenticeship, a capstone, and then finally providing the credentialing. This is hugely valuable. If you can imagine, it helps to ensure that people are getting the training they need to be successful in their job. It's also significantly rewarding then, if we think about career path and retention, because people then have proof in a sense that they are really growing within their companies. The next thing that is going to be really important to this is solving the industry structure problem that I spoke about earlier. Bringing together the owners who have the incentives for competitiveness, the strongest incentives for competitiveness, and the contractors who are delivering the work, so that over time they together can innovate. The kinds of things that we're starting to see now, and this is increasing in prevalence, are equity-based arrangements. So like if you think about some of the deals that have been struck around the LNG capacity in the United States right now, you have EPC contractors taking equity-based arrangements, including in the upfront portion of the design. That's a way of aligning incentives. Alliances, so a range of examples where the owners and the contractors are saying, we're not going to do 3 bids and a buy every project and try to grind you down to the lowest possible price. We're going to commit to work with each other over a longer series of developments, trusting that together we're going to be able to drive competitiveness down the cost curve. And then other forms of bringing together the owner-contractor, whether that's through integrated project delivery, which many of us are familiar with, collaborative contracts, or long-term partnerships. This is growing. There's a lot more acceptance of this, that we need to be less commercially oriented at the interface between the owner and the contractor. We need to do more to bring those parties together. The next thing is around technologies. So where the quick wins of technology adoption were for things around control, I mentioned it earlier around, for example, document control. There's more energy now being put into productivity or technology that has the potential to have a direct impact on productivity. So examples like automated engineering checking. We worked with one oil and gas company that was using Gen AI to check drawings against basic rules to ensure that they were compliant with specifications, or that, for example, there was alignment across different engineering packages. That has a huge impact on productivity, because we all know how that can slow down once we find an engineering flaw. Automated design, so in its infancy, obviously, but something where there's the potential to replace engineering hours, but then also increase the precision of engineering through automation. Specific task automation, so the application of mechanization and automation to the things that are happening out in the field, which of course just has the potential to create leverage for the workforce. And then things like intelligent machine control, AR-guided operation to improve the speed at which you're able to do a particular task, or even things like worker aids. So different levels of development, but if we think about in 15 years massively increasing the productivity, our view is that these are the areas that we need to see significant growth and development in. Things that are going to, again, result in more meters per day, tons per day, welds per day, and so on. Production control, I think that there's something, one of the presenters in the previous session talked about this, was you have to know what's going out in the field. You have to have control over production within a construction site. And the whole reason is because you want to be able to help the construction crews remove bottlenecks that arise for them. So One example that we worked on was we were working on a major pipeline, and the crews were showing up every day without their coding inspectors weren't showing out to help basically move the line on. And as a project manager, you have to know that, because otherwise you're not going to be able to fix it. And so there's a lot of opportunity within the direct project management with the view to how do we help the construction crews ultimately be more productive. And then in terms of project over project improvement, lessons learned is something that we've struggled with as an industry. I think for a lot of reasons it's something that we're going to continue to struggle with. But on the other hand, there are certain companies that have demonstrated that they've been able to figure out. Tesla, when you look at their speed and capex reduction across their Tesla facilities they've built, they've been able to make massive gains project over project. And they've done it by leveraging in-house capabilities, so they've insourced a lot, going after speed in every decision. They built what they called, I actually don't know their terminology, but tiger teams, like this elite group of folks that went from project to project to project working together in order to improve outcomes, and a whole bunch of other things in behind that. But this is something where if you say, wow, it's really hard for us to improve project over project, there are companies that are demonstrating that it's possible. So, in summary, with a $30 trillion infrastructure gap, this is something that we need to find a way to improve. Our view is that the only method or the only pathway in order to close that gap is going to be through resource productivity, and it's going to be delivered through people like we have in this room. Owners and contractors and suppliers from within the industry. We need to find a way to improve productivity to give ourselves a chance. So thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I think we were going to take questions or comments.
First of all, I want to thank Kevin for an outstanding presentation, very intriguing and thought-provoking, as you might imagine. We do have several questions. The first being, you mentioned with the utility client that there were 10 skills or 10 categories that were mentioned for improvement in productivity. What were some of those?
So some of them were, so going off memory a little bit, they were valuing project management, basic project management. So that's one of them. So the idea being, we feel like it's important to be able to manage the risks and opportunities within our projects, so that we don't have projects go off the rails. And so the basics of how do you set up a project and manage it through its life cycle. Another one that was really interesting was around project analytics. So the idea being, we feel like we are generating an amazing amount of data on projects. How do we use that data to predict risks and opportunities before they arise? So that was something that was different. Value engineering. So the basic point being, when we over-design projects relative to the basic scope that's required, we get sort of the same output for more money. If we're going to increase the output of the sector, one of the things that's important is driving down the scope relative to the sort of minimum requirements. And so that was another area that for them was significantly valuable.
In attracting folks to this industry, to what extent does safety and overall mental well-being have, and what can we do to use safety and mental well-being aspirations to improve productivity?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing that when we go to a project we do to improve productivity is we go and we spend times with the construction crews. Just because it's sort of that's the unit of what delivers productivity on any individual site. And invariably, there are all of these technical reasons, things that are hard, and we talked about them. I talked about the coding inspectors not showing up when they're supposed to earlier, not getting material delivery, not having the engineering. All that's true. But what I think is really interesting is, and I think this is now linking to the mental well-being, is that the mindset that a particular tradesman brings to a construction site is really important. Like, you can imagine, if you show up and you're really motivated to go and do a good job, you have a huge potential. You're going to go and you're going to solve whatever the barriers are that are put in front of you. If you show up and you're pissed off and annoyed because of, and it could be any number of reasons, compensation, it could be all the kinds of pain points, and so on and so forth, it has a huge impact because all of a sudden you shut down. And so and by the way, in some of the cases, it's because of, the timing of the lunch break is annoying because relative to the time it would take to get to a suitable place to have a comfortable lunch, or I was on one site and folks were frustrated that they didn't have enough wash cars, and so mental well-being is going to be hugely important. It has a major driver of anybody's ability to problem solve within a site, and it's a massively underemphasized lever for project teams. Everybody focuses on technically the project management part of this, but there's a lot you can do just in terms of improving the mental well-being and the mindsets of the folks that come onto site.
Great. And by the way, I'll remind the crowd that if you have a question organically that pops up and you don't want to mess with the app, raise your hand and these folks here will recognize you and we will field your question. And you may have already answered this. One of the questions is, have the productivity numbers been correlated to safety improvements in the same amount of time, or has one been ahead of the other?
Yeah, we don't have
touch base with that.
Yeah, we don't have industry-wide safety metrics relative to the productivity trends. What I will say, though, is when we have studied this on job sites, individual job sites, every time we found a positive correlation between productivity and safety. So essentially a productive site tends to be a more productive site tends to be a safer site. And the reason being is that another underlying truth is that planned work tends to be safer and more productive than unplanned work. And so that in most cases they move together.
You said that in 2000 there were about $8 trillion worth of construction. What did we project back in 2000 would be the case for 2025? And was this a shortfall, or did we meet the gap? And if so, how?
It's a great question. I actually don't know. The first time we wrote this, we wrote our report on productivity was in 2017. I can speak from then to now. It's actually the reason we did this research piece was to see, we similarly said, hey, we're going to fall short. What are the implications? Over that time period from 2017 to 2024, we have not, we've continued to sort of lag relative to what's required in terms of the industry. So that's a shorter time period, but I'd expect a similar answer back to 2000.
You talked about alliances versus 3 bids and a buy, but oftentimes our procurement friends get in the way of that. Any advice for what we can do with respect to the procurement folks who are tasked, and I'm kind of ad-libbing the question here, who are tasked with getting the lowest possible price regardless of capability of the selectee?
Yeah, so we come across this question all the time because people are more comfortable that they're getting a competitive rate if they have the ability to test the market. That's fair. In a healthy alliance is one that's going to be good for both parties. I think that then as an owner, for example, which is the procurement folks that we're talking about, you need to find a way to give comfort that not on every project, but over time you're going to have an ability to test the market. And so the couple parts to that, one is through productivity targets. So if, let's take solar, for example, is if you have a series of solar developments, you should, as part of your alliance, be able to say, this is what our expectation is for cost improvement over time, which, by the way, could potentially create a trigger to exit. I think the other thing that you can do is create the option to test the market, but maybe a little less frequently. And then I think the third thing is around transparency. So in these alliances, some of the things we've seen work is, essentially the open book concept of, I'm going to have a very good view into what your costs are, which are going to give me trust that, things are competitive.
Let's take one from the floor. Gracie? And by the way, if you have a question, just raise your hand. We have microphones here ready to service you. Question?
Great talk. I agree with most of what you're saying up there. Looking at the slide on the screen, massively scale the workforce. If we could wave that magic wand, things would be great, right?
Yeah.
You had another slide earlier that illustrated that we're in competition with a large number of other industries for that same workforce. So the question is, when do you capture, if you're going to massively scale the trade schools and the private investments, when do you capture those kids to stream them into that? At what age group? Any research on that?
Yeah, I'm not the expert on that. Kids make decisions in high school, though, right now in terms of what they're going to do with their career. And so that's, then the natural place to look. I think, though, I'd go a step further, though, and say, it's also, if you got to think about it like the parents, there's so much bias right now within our economy that you need a post-secondary education, for example. If we were more authoritarian in the way that we govern, we would actually allocate. We would say no, absolutely not. We're going to have this many, in our sector, this many engineers, this many manufacturers, and we're going to have this many craft, and we would push way more people into the trades than we currently are. We'd say no, we don't need that many people in the other parts of the economy, and so, that's not what we're going to do. And so then what we somehow need to find a way to do is to demonstrate. And by the way, I think a lot of people who are journeyman iron workers and electricians and so forth, they will talk about how much they value their career, and to some extent we need to make that clear to parents as well, that your children can do very, very well in a career like that.
Another follow-up question similarly situated is, are the problems with improvements in productivity more associated with management and management challenges or lack of skilled labor?
Yeah. It's gonna be hard for me to say one more than the other. I do know the answers both. We were on one job, and we were measuring weld repairs based off the demographics of the workforce, and it was no surprise, right? The more experienced folks had way lower repair rates. The folks who had been on site longer had way lower repair rates than folks who were more junior and newer to the site. And that's a very direct impact on productivity. And so if you'd say, back to the magic wand question, if you could wave the magic wand, improve the welder capability to reduce the amount of repairs, then absolutely that would have a significant influence on the productivity for that particular project. So there's definitely something there about the skill of the craftsmen themselves. But on the other hand, from a management perspective, is project managers don't every day make it easy on craft in order to do their trade effectively. All kinds of barriers show up, and in addition to that, in many cases, most project engineers, project managers I speak to are actually pretty disconnected from what is happening out in the field. They don't, as much as they could, spend time with the crews to understand what's driving productivity. And so there's a lot more that can be done on that front as well.
Yeah, it's a great segue into the next question. What do you feel is the biggest blind spot? And owners have many blind spots and many biases, but what do you feel is the biggest blind spot that owners need to be focusing on right now that gets the greatest ROI?
I think and I mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but the biggest blind spot is on mindsets, behaviors, capabilities, and doing that not just for the owner team, but the entire construction ecosystem on a particular site. And so you go and you speak to any project director, you say, what's on your agenda, and you get them to give you 5 things. They're going to talk about some big negotiation they have upcoming, getting a contractor mobilized, staying ahead of the schedule in a particular area, and maybe 2 or 3 cost risks. Nobody ever talks about the term we use, organizational health of the construction site from top to bottom. We do with organizations, we measure something called organizational health, which is basically how strong is your organization in terms of how they're integrated together, how they solve problems, so on and so forth. That's something that a project manager, project director, executive doesn't. I think they think about it sometimes around their core team, right? And we've done a little bit about bringing contractors and owners together, about raising the cohesiveness of a particular team. But it's fairly rare that folks are, within their top agenda item, they're thinking about how do I make this the best place to work where everybody shows up motivated, to deliver whatever part of the project that is.
Can you talk a little bit more about mindset? I think that's intriguing. You mentioned mindset, behaviors, and the third one? Capabilities, right? Talk to us about the importance of mindset. That was a little bit of a surprise to me.
I risk of repeating myself. I just think it matters. I'll use another example. So, big oil and gas facility, and they early on actually recognized this as being something that was really important to them in terms of how they ran their project, and was going to really impact the outcomes of the project. And they ran a massive campaign in order to try to improve, get the most out of the people on their site. And some of the things they focused on was, for example, pride of workmanship. And so they had, and some of this stuff is, a little silly. I think that it's the sum of a lot of different things that you do in order to create a good work site. But they had communications out to the crew, and it was, look what we built today. The whole idea was around trying to promote that, this was a Canadian project, was they were building an important piece of Canadian infrastructure and that they should feel proud of. Another example, I think there's a company, they're called BuilderFacts. I met with the CEO a few months ago and we were talking a little bit about what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're building a credentialing app for craft. And what that credentialing app is meant to do is it's built off of Carfax, right? So they called it BuilderFacts, Carfax. So if you go and you buy a used car, you go to Carfax and it gives you the full history of everything that they've done. Well, they're doing this with trades, and it's something for the craft that they have the app. But the whole idea is that over time it's meant to help them log what they have successfully delivered through their career, both from a capability standpoint, but then also from an experience standpoint. And so one of the things being able to go into the app and say, here are the 4 or 5 projects that I've been a part of, that I've built, pictures, all those sorts of things. And there's this huge opportunity from a standpoint of, then that creates all kinds of liquidity in terms of the being able to get folks to the right projects, and it's all around pride of workmanship. I think everybody shows up to work trying to do a good job. There's all these kinds of things that get in the way, and everything you can do to promote that pride of workmanship. And that's, by the way, it's the craft and the trades, but it's the project managers and it's the procurement org and all the the project controls folks. It's for all of them. It's important that they show up with a sense of purpose.
Great, thanks. Gracie, I can't see you, but I saw you go away, so I assume you've got a question. Gracie in the back and then Luke here. Am I wrong? Okay, hold on, we'll get to you, Hal. Luke, go ahead. Gracie, if you're back there, I cannot see you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for your presentation. Love the analysis and the conclusions. There was one dimension, you mentioned just mindset, and one dimension I missed a little bit is leadership. So project success and continuous improvement is linked certainly to what happens on a project planning and project architecture standpoint. So I would say the head of the operation, but then there is a lot happening every day on the ground in the day-to-day operations. Where do you see the role of the frontline leaders, and how should the construction industry invest more in frontline leaders, enablement, leadership training? Because, as you know, they have a huge impact on the operators showing up, not showing up, on their mindset, on how happy they are, and the culture develop on the side, attrition, and all those things. So talk a little bit about the role of those frontline leaders.
Yeah, so when we work on productivity, the role we focus on first and foremost, no pun intended, is the foreman. The view being that the foreman is, really the heartbeat, engine room. I don't know what the right analogy is. That that will end up ultimately drive production on the site. The kinds of things that we've done is capability building programs in terms of like how do you trying to across 100, 200 foreman work site, improve planning across the site. How do you manage crews? How do you have tough conversations? There's actually all these really soft, both soft and hard skills that are really, really important within that group. Now, interestingly, and I think this varies by jurisdiction, but I remember working on one job, speaking to a lot of these foremen, and they almost unilaterally said, I don't really want to be a foreman. I'm sort of doing this job because I have to. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. We're all sort of accustomed to the idea that we want to progress within our jobs. But one of the things that's missing for a lot of these folks is they don't see the career progression. They look at the leadership of some of the contractor companies and they say, well, hang on, it's not people for, like, if you go back just a little bit in time, the leaders within these companies actually, started on the tools and progressed that way. The connection isn't quite as strong right now, and so a lot of these foremen that we were speaking to were saying, I'd actually rather still be on the tools because it's just way more rewarding. Like, why am I going to manage a bunch of headaches and try to get the material on site that's not showing up, or try to figure out what the engineers want me to do, or all, like, it's it's unfulfilling and it's annoying. I'd rather go and pull cable. And so from a leader, I think that on-site leadership, it's so important. I think that there's a ton that can be done to help upskill for example, the foreman. For most foremen, they don't get a lot of training, for example, on how to manage a crew. They do it based off of what they've seen, which could be good or bad. But then I think also you need to find a rewarding career path for folks so that they look at and they say, I'm going to do this because it's going to help contribute for my family, or help me along the way. So, some thoughts.
Gracie, I still can't see you, but I think you're back there somewhere, Last Chance Cafe. So
Hi,
if
Greg.
somebody's got a mic, speak right up.
Can you hear me?
There we
Hi,
go.
my name's Greg Johnson with the SRS Group. Kevin, you had mentioned that we need to massively scale the workforce. And I'm not in the construction trade myself. but I've been a member of Associated Builders and Contractors for the last half dozen years and on the safety committee. So I've learned a lot about the construction trades. Ran a workforce development program in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for about 17 years, and the big focus was getting people back into the workforce, but getting them involved in educational programs to get degrees. And probably everybody can relate to this. I don't know about your community, but where we live, everywhere I go, I see billboards promoting colleges, master's degrees, get this 4-year program. I was with a college professor the other day. He said it costs about $85,000 a year to put a kid into their school with both a degree and room and board. Yet I never see any advertising for the trades. And you just mentioned that you talk to most people that are successful in the trades. They love their job. They make great money. Yeah. And I've been promoting over the last number of years how much money you can make in the trades, and you don't have to be buried in $250,000 of debt coming out at 22 years of age. I had a person working for me, had a master's degree. She was an educator. She lost her job, came to work in a workforce development program. She wanted to go back and get her doctorate. I said, why would you get a doctorate and get buried in debt again? Well, that's because she's been promoted that her whole life. I think if you can get the trade associations to promote, it's all marketing. Everywhere I go, I don't see any marketing for the kind of money you can make, the fact that you don't have to get buried in debt, the kind of reward you can get looking at a building or a project that's been built. And I think, like when you mentioned about the pride, look at the Marines. Their marketing is all about pride. So I think if you can tap into those areas that attract people, I think it's easier to attract people. But I don't see it out there. So I think if you can focus on that, because every industry is struggling for workers, I think if you want workers, you have to do what the education community has done, is you have to continue to promote.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. There's a real value proposition here. And I certainly think that we as an industry, these schools, we can be more direct on what that value proposition is, because people should be flocking or flooding the industry.
We've got way more questions than we have time for. One final question. How do you deal with the scale of a contractor when it becomes exceedingly risky for them to invest in productivity improvement versus a larger contractor who may have a little bit more cash to flow around and actually risk implementing something? So the plight of the small contractor who desires to do it, desires to improve productivity, but whose investment in that initiative may prove fatal.
Yeah. We went through this choice with a large energy company related to a portfolio, and we looked at it every which way, and we ended up in that case electing to go with the larger contractor, because for all the reasons you mentioned, like they're saying that we have this capital program, it's mission critical for us to deliver. We really believe we can turn the ship faster with the smaller contractor, but we have this major risk of them essentially, folding or not being able to deliver the capacity.
No easy answer, is there?
Sorry?
No easy answer.
No easy answer on this one. Like one of the things that I've always wondered on this topic, though, is like, to what degree can you try to insource as an owner organization? So this is a strategy question that comes up quite often, and there's a huge benefit to saying, for a portion of your capital delivery, I don't know if it's 10, 20, or 30%, but maybe you should bring that in-house. There's different ways to do that. Obviously, you could build the capability from ground up. Then the other thing is, going and buying a smaller construction firm, and then integrating into the organization. Of course, giving them your full portfolio for delivery, but then using that as a little bit of your incubation of improved productivity metrics. And so that way, you then have the direct incentives to drive productivity growth. You have the means to do it because you have direct control over a portion of your work, but you're not taking the risk across your full portfolio. So that's one way to think about balance. But yeah, that's a tough question.
It's a tough question. Yeah. They're all tough questions, I think. And Kevin, we want to express our appreciation for an enlightening presentation. Let's show it up, or give it up for Kevin. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Again, take out your app, go to Agenda, Monday, this presentation and answer the little questionnaire. An excellent afternoon of informative presentations, but we're not done yet. And I'd like to invite our owner panel to make your way to the platform while I introduce you. In the interest of time, moderating our panel will be Angela Scow, Vice President and Head of Large and Complex Construction with CNA. Joining her on stage are Steve Dora, who's a Senior Manager for Facilities at Toyota, Tom Eastman, who is an Associate Director of Project Realization with Bristol-Myers Squibb, Wayne Standing, Senior Principal Engineer with ExxonMobil Global Projects, and Jessica Hill, Senior Vice President and Head of Core Construction with CNA. Andy Browning is back again on this stage, General Manager of Engineering Construction with Duke. So quite a plethora of resource here. Angela, what questions do you have for this game? It's all yours.
Thank you. I have a few, Greg. And I think our panel being at the end of the day, we realize that we're the last one, but sometimes you save the best for last. What can I say? So I'm glad to have the group here with me today, and I'm going to start off and talk about, I'm going to reach out to Andy Browning and ask him. We were talking a few weeks ago, and equitable risk transfer came up. So Andy, my question for you is overall, equitable risk transfer can help owners achieve cost reduction and project success. Have you experienced any challenges with risk allocation in your projects?
Definitely. As a regulated utility, we are extremely risk averse. Our initial stance is don't take any risk. 100% goes over on the contractor. And with the amount of work we have coming, we realize it's going to work better if we develop that relationship and make it a partnership and try to see, which risk would be suitable for us to carry and which ones they don't want to and why, and try to work with each other, understand each other. I think that would benefit us both.
Okay. Have you found a contractual arrangement that fairly allocates the risk that's going to help you do that?
So it's interesting, the Kevin's presentation, he had that one slide that had the various different types of contracting strategies, and we are currently working on all of those, depending on if it's a portfolio of projects or a large project. So like the IPD for a very large, what we call a mega project, we're starting to finally look at the partnership thing where we say we've got a solar builder that's doing job after job with us. Go ahead and work out a contract so that all we got to do is just assign the work. We know what it's going to cost. We're currently up until last year, you finish one project, we get ready for the next one, and we go and have to renegotiate all of our exhibits and agree on terms, which is a huge waste for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you from an insurer perspective of construction projects, we see the allocation of risk playing major issues, right? So I'm so glad to see that we have owners that are willing to look at ways to share in that risk and keep it equitable for everybody on the project. Like you said, it can reduce cost, it can help keep your contractor healthy, and helps you continue to build more, go forward. Okay. Does anybody else on the panel have any thoughts around that?
I'll double down on that a little bit, just for context. She put me next to you on purpose, even though we had no idea that we were walking up here together. But so we bring an insurer's perspective, and as a friend in the industry jokes that we are 3% of anything that anybody cares about on a construction project, because that's how much insurance should cost, right? So I will try and keep it limited to the 3% of the talking. But I was just with somebody who services the utilities, a contractor, a couple of weeks ago. That's one of our insureds. And one of the underwriters, for our perspective, right, we want to know, how do we share risk? How does that work? What are we taking responsibility for versus an owner? And when the underwriter said, well, are you going to have, contractually, are you going to be able to mutually indemnify each other? And he goes, with a utility? And it kind of like stopped the room, right? So to your point, I'm going to have him call you. But like those are the things from an insurance perspective. We want to be able to provide solutions for insurance for owners and contractors. And when we don't see contractors taking on what we know that they have control over, it makes it hard for us to give them or be okay with the insurance output from that perspective, because who wants to insure something when we know that they aren't the ones that are actually manning what's going on? So that was my 3%.
Okay, appreciate that, Jessica. All right, so anybody else have any comments want to add to that? All right, well then I'm going to move to Wayne. And Wayne, I want to know what your greatest challenge is today for you and your industry sector.
Well, in our case, similar to what you heard here, labor is certainly a major factor where we work. And in our case, talk about how do you address it, because the projects aren't stopped. It's that early contractor engagement. Because one of the things that we find, it's not just one solution. It's really important to understand the environment you're working in and what's driving the labor market. There are places where we work where it's very transient worker environment. We might have a project for 5 years. If you have people on site for more than 12 weeks, you're doing good. But there's drivers like taxes. There's drivers from the availability in that area, where you're bringing in workers from outside, what's the environment that you're providing them to live at. All of those are major influences, but you take that same project and you put it in a different location, there may be much different drivers on the workforce, the skill level, et cetera. And the only way we found that we can really combat that is partnering with the contractors really early on, so that them and ourselves fully understand what the drivers are between each of the companies, so that we can get the workers when we need them, get the right skill level when we need them. Because I think that challenge is in every place. While whether it's the unions that have a good program to try to elevate people in their organization, whether we have other organizations like NCER and that are continuing to educate and advance people, fact of the matter is, it's hard to get people to come into the organization and stay in. When the average people that I see on site look like me, not like my kids, that's where the driver is, I think, for us longer term.
And we heard Kevin speak earlier, and some good comments from the audience about engaging and getting people into our field. Is there any special strategies outside of partnering early with the contractor that you've employed to try to boost that?
Yeah, so we have education programs for our own people as well, and then certainly we work with the contractors on their education programs. We have some contractors that, in fact, I know one of them that's in this room, that had an open invitation. If you want to work in our industry, we'll train you. And they provided that initial training to see, one is, are you interested in the organization? They'll train you for free. They'll provide you a position afterwards. And this is in, the construction trades, just to try to combat. And so we've worked with those companies and others to try to encourage that. But are we doing enough? I mean, certainly by some of the stuff you heard today, and same with what we're seeing in our workforce is consistent with stuff today. Is I think we need a lot more at all levels, from government through industry, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you. Would anybody else like to comment on maybe strategies they're using in their workforce?
So we're pretty good with supporting our communities with STEM. The other area is with our linesmen, getting out there with community college, setting up programs, let them see what it's about. But as far as construction, I think we've failed, and that's something we need to improve on.
I think in central New Jersey, there's a program where we are going into the high schools And there's an evening session for people that aren't in high school that want to come and learn more about the trades. 2,500 people are registered for the daytime. It's closed out. Evening is open. And you got all the trade people there at their tables. So we've been promoting that for the last 3 or 4 years in the Construction Roundtable for New Jersey.
And did the schools, were the schools willing to partner with you on that pretty readily?
Absolutely.
That's good.
So I think that's where you need to get to show people there's these other career paths that are, well-paying, and it's rewarding, as we heard earlier. At the end of the day, you see what you've accomplished. I think that's important. That's job satisfaction.
Great. Well, with the new employees and bringing people into the industry that haven't been in it in the past, I'm going to go back to Wayne now and ask him about safety. What have your safety expectations changed in the last 3 years or so based on bringing new folks in and types of work?
I would say, so when you say like change, our safety expectations have continued to progress to, expectations being higher and higher, lower in injuries. But the main focus really with us has started in 2 areas. One is on focus first on life-altering injuries and elimination of those, and then tied to human performance. But probably the biggest change we've done is really not in our industry has been feedback from the contractor organizations where it's, can you standardize? Why is it when I finish a job at ExxonMobil and I go to one of your competitors, why do I have to retrain people that cost time and that on those standards? The objectives are, fundamentally, the objectives are exactly the same. We don't want to get people hurt. So why do I have to change what I do based on where I go? And so we've done a lot of work with ourselves and our competitors to try to standardize what are our approaches to life-altering injuries, what are our approaches around human performance, and that carries well beyond safety. That same thing on industry standardization, and that while it's really important in the safety area, and safety may be one of the easiest to collaborate on, but that same thing really, I think, cascades through every part of our industry from a skill standpoint, from a training standpoint, et cetera.
Great. It's kind of like what was discussed earlier, if you can do a place to house all the training that you've done and that they've passed this and they've completed this, kind of like your certificates of credentialing for safety, if we could build that in our industry so it doesn't have to be repeated but enhanced from place to place where people go, that would be something to think about.
Yeah, I think the other important piece of that too with us from a safety is hands-on demonstration. We've had in one of our craft areas, in one area in the Gulf Coast, where we test everybody coming in on skills, and we had a 40% failure rate. And these are people that have passed from a certification standpoint. So we've gone back on pretty much all of our projects now, that as we come in, either the contractor does it in their organization, that we've kind of certified, or we do it with the contract in partnership with the contractors. Simple demonstration of the skills. You're a rigger, show me. I'm not, it's not overly complicated. I'd like you to move that pump from there to there. Demonstrate it. And it's not that we want to turn them away. We want to make sure, and what can we do to help them move up the skill ladder so that we're confident with their capabilities on site from a safety standpoint, and then it cascades to productivity in that as well.
And do you do that all within Exxon, or do you tap into any other resources to help you?
We've done it both with our own, depending on where we're working. We've done it with, we've set up the facilities, mainly because they probably weren't available. But in many of the cases, we partnered with organizations to outsource the training, or have partnered with the contractor, and a lot of the contractors have programs already in place, and we'll use those programs that we've kind of validated the system they use.
Great, thank you. Any?
I'd say from a safety perspective, we're exactly like Wayne. You know, we're always going to try to make things safer and better and ratchet everything down. But lately, the last 2 years, we've increased our focus on what we call a SIF, significant injury or fatality, because we're seeing recordable injury numbers come down, we've not seen much of a change in our SIFs.
Sorry, can I add? Yeah, for the last few years, we really focused on leading indicators for safety. So we have a program, some of our KPIs are find it first. So we're really engaging our general contractors to find issues first. Toyota does safety audits every day as well. So like we're very hands-on, but that's one of the KPIs. If we find an incident, we hope that they find it first. After you find it first, you fix it fast. So closing those issues or incidents within 24 hours, and then no repeats, right? So we want to make sure that whatever we've done to countermeasure that issue is not repeated again.
And just to add on that really quick, outside of auto insurance, we have seen the same thing from an insurance perspective. Frequency is down, severity is up, right? So it's how do you find ways to get in front of it before they even happen to prevent that from the severity issues spiking.
So has emerging technology made any difference in the workforce and the safety? Have you guys seen any impact on that?
I know one area we've been testing and trying to, it's been evolving over the years, and that's with when we have either multiple cranes in the same area or a crane operating around power lines, with utilizing some new technology out there for proximity, so that there's an audible indication that they're getting within the approach distance and they know to stop.
Okay. So Jessica, I'm going to ask you, from claims that we see, the safety that we see across our portfolio and what we know about the industry, have you seen any impact on losses from emerging technology?
First, I'll geek out on you guys really fast. I've been coming to Kurt now, I don't know, 5 something years.
Yeah.
And one of the first times, and we usually like to observe, again, and be the 3%, but one of the first things I came in, we were talking about technology in the construction industry and people actually using it. I feel like it was, I forget what year it was, I won't come up with that. But we're still kind of talking about the same things, and even the presentation before us today too was, it's all about ROI, right? So what are you going to get back in return? Show me before I let you spend the money. And it seems like a lot of the spend is still going towards being able to operationally affect things as opposed to being able to affect productivity or even safety. So I guess from my perspective, we have people, and I'll use telematics as an example, who want to have an automatic discount on their insurance because they're using telematics. Problem with telematics is that people aren't using it the right way and causing more accidents. And when you have telematics in your car and you cause an accident, you actually have out with a worse claim because they're like, well, you should have known what you were doing, so why weren't you taking care of that, right? Or the exoskeleton stuff. We've seen people dabble in it. I don't know that we have enough people who are really taking advantage of all the opportunities that exist for it to be impactful across the industry from a safety perspective.
Okay. All right. Great. So thank you for that. So I'm going to mix it up a little bit with Steve, and I'm going to ask him, based on what's been happening in our world lately, what does your industry sector feel that the tariffs will have on your supply chain, steel, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a timely question. President Trump announced a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. Yeah, and then who knows, it could be changed tomorrow. But ultimately, tariffs in general, it'll make things go up. price-wise. So kind of twofold answer. One is externally for customers. So buying a vehicle, prices are going to go up. Actually, just last week, our VP sent out an email because everyone's kind of a little bit worried about all of the changes, and he had mentioned that the last 4 years, the average vehicle price went from $37,000 to $45,000. Actually, $35,000 to $47,000. So $12,000. So $3,000 every year. So inflation, no tariffs. And then there's been articles where the tariffs have shown that perhaps a $3,000 per vehicle impact for customers. Actually, this morning I was reading a CBS article that they had some consultant on there saying that a $25,000 vehicle from being imported from Mexico would add an additional over $6,000. That's huge. So, so if you're in the market for like a Tacoma, they're built in Mexico. If their sticker price is $52,000, would you buy it for $65,000 like next month? So we'll see. So externally, it's gonna, it kind of just gets added on to the sticker price. Internally, my job with overseeing construction, our building materials are going to go up: structural steel, miscellaneous steel for conveyors and mezzanines, aluminum siding, our sandwich panel systems that we use, or power cables from Mexico, switchboard transformers, things like that. So all that's going to jack the price of the project. Well, now Toyota has to decide, kind of reprioritize, right? If we have a fiscal year budget, this much money is allocated. Now the project bids are coming in. We might have to cancel some projects, mothball, and then shift the budget over to. So we're doing less. The other thing about the customer being impacted is they're going to buy less vehicles. So now we have a production problem, right? So we have, if we build 500 a day, now we have to do 400 a day. So like that's also in the same labor force. So it's very cost impactful that way.
Well, that wasn't good news, because
Sorry.
I'm eventually going to need a new car, but I think I need to buy it right now before it goes up again. And you mentioned the manufacturing, and so I can foresee, obviously with some of the things that are happening, the labor, right? Are we going to be able to get the labor? It's going to be a lot tighter going forward.
Yeah, I think as costs go up, if one of these tariffs get enacted, right? Right now it's just kind of negotiating tactics. But yeah, if projects get canceled, maybe the labor force goes up, and it kind of flatten out a little bit. Because everywhere's, right now, the last couple of years has been very busy, right? Mm-hmm. Interest rates are going down, the projects are going back up, labor is getting weaned off. So maybe that'll kind of balance it out a little bit.
And does it just add increased uncertainty, right? Because what is going to happen? We know what happened as of an hour ago.
Right.
What's going to happen next month, and then if that affects the demand and pricing in the U.S., does that then make pricing go down because of the availability in the market elsewhere, and so it becomes more competitive to do things elsewhere as a trade-off to offset the pricing increase in the U.S.?
Can you imagine trying to negotiate a contract now on a project? Where's the risk going to fall?
Right.
You estimate your project, and you tell the board this is what the project's going to cost with all the risk you knew at that time when you went to the board. All bets are off now. Like I said, you may have to cancel or shift them, delay them.
Well, and I think all of these issues just, really push us back to creating those relationships, alliances, partnerships, and collaboration, because, it starts with you, the owner who's going to decide to do the project. Everything is going to trickle down, and the contractor may not be able to get the supplies. So it's going to be tough. And I think that as long as we have owners that are willing to have that discussion and create that type of synergies, that we can weather the storm better than most. And that brings up something that Tom mentioned to me last week as well, that Tom, you had told me that your team, building team continuity and staying on schedule for speed to market was imperative. And you were looking at designs around the equipment you can get as opposed to designs hoping to get the needed equipment.
Right, one of the initiatives we're looking at is to, early on, is to actually select equipment, procure it, and then finish the design based on what you're already committed to buying. And you bring your trade partners in, and if you know that up front earlier, then I think it brings some certainty and it helps your schedule. So we're looking at trying to do that on more of our projects as we go forward, trying to pull some of those decisions and purchases earlier. And then that impacts our cash flow, but we have to adjust our cash flow based on what we're spending up front with design assist partners, and then gives us a little more cost certainty, and schedule is more predictable.
Okay.
So.
Are you doing anything around, like when you're looking at that, are you also looking at any, the team continuity you've built in your labor force, and what you can do to continue that, knowing that you're going to have some slumps? Is there anything you're managing differently around that?
What we're trying to do on our sites is we have a stable of our CM firms that we use, so you try to make sure on some projects where you're able just to select, you want to keep them busy on a campus, keep the project managers, the project engineers that are there for that CM busy, so when one job is winding down, the next job is ramping up, and you don't get that, I need to find a job, I need a paycheck, I'm going to jump to the next CM that has a job, versus always going out to bid, and the staff is in limbo that they present at the RFP stage. In interviews, they show you all the pictures, and then when you actually start the job, they're no longer available. So if you have some continuity, but to be able to keep the CMs on the site, keep them busy, you kind of dole the work out, which is sometimes in opposite of what procurement wants, as we've heard earlier today, is, you know, their objectives aren't aligned with necessarily the global engineering and the project execution team wanting to keep some continuity and hand select who's good for what job. So that's our challenges these days, to try to align ourselves with that organization.
Any other owners want to comment?
I feel that pain about losing your CM. We had just one light pole to install, and we had lost a month because the guy couldn't come back on site. It was bad.
Let me see, what else can I throw at you guys? So we haven't, today's the first day, so we haven't talked about the diversity of workforce yet. And I would like to know, have any of your organizations, while you're trying to build your labor force and do your training, have you adopted any kind of process around bringing a more diverse workforce into your group?
We haven't looked at doing that. We do focus on small business.
Okay.
From that standpoint, as far as the actual makeup of the workforce, we don't look into it at that stage. It's just, you qualify government from a small business standpoint, and we have targets around that on every project. And it's tough when you get larger projects. It requires our CM partner to maybe break the packages down so you can reach out to the right sized firms to get it done. On a large job, people that can execute the work aren't small. They don't qualify. And so we've actually held, like, similar to a job fair, the CM went out to the community and held like a project fair to try to see who was available, who was interested, get them pre-qualified. And then the next hurdle was BMS requires everybody to be in ISNet in a passing grade, so that's created some hurdles, but if you put the resources against that, we can help them get there. We tell them whatever that costs you as a supplier, pass that cost on, we're willing to pay for that, but we want you in ISNet, which sometimes is opposed to the pre-qual package that a CM uses, so it's almost like the double entry again. They get pre-qualified to work for the CM, but then they gotta do all the extra paperwork to work for BMS. So.
Okay.
Yeah, with us, I know when I first started working in the Gulf Coast, everything was English. that's, you know, that's our language of construction, and that's the way it is. Now, pretty much everything that we do from a field standpoint, it's in Spanish and in English, to get to the workforce that matches, depending on where we are. Our workforce can be predominantly Spanish, depending on which trade we're talking about. The language can differ. And then we also work at other places in the world where, you know, you can go from 25 languages on a project to one. But I think the key thing is looking at diversity from a language, ethnic background, and recognizing that diversity, and how do you get to meet them where they are, to bring them in, and from a skill standpoint, from a development standpoint. And one of the things we had to spend a lot of time with is to the detail of looking at down to the crew makeup. Because while I may have 2 different languages, but then what about my crane operator that's speaking to the pipe fitter crew? What about that mix, so that working with the contractors, especially when I got many subcontractors, is looking at how does that workforce work together and communicate with each other, and from a safety, productivity standpoint. I mean, that's the reality of trying to get the workforce that you're looking for in the demand that we are today. But if you're expecting the safety expectations and the productivity expectations that we do have, that we have to make it as easy as possible for them to get it right. And so language is probably the biggest thing.
Okay.
You're talking about the MBE, DBE stuff, and I think more and more now we are seeing that those folks too have to be very sophisticated in what they're doing. So we see a lot of our contractors working with them to try and bring them along to actually have them fulfill the obligations, as opposed to, admittedly, sometimes you just see it as a paper pass-through, right? And that's not the expectation or the intent, is that we're trying to bring more people into the industry, so that the more we can do as a community to build up those folks and give them the skills that they need. And we were talking about technology earlier, right? Like, how can we give people something that's easy to use from that perspective, that doesn't cost a lot of money, that they don't have risk managers, right, for the most part. They're not the huge contractors of the world. So how do we help bring them along in the industry to make sure that they continue to grow, and maybe they aren't an MBE or DBE, but have more ability to help us get to where we need to go with all of our growth goals.
Yep. Agreed. And, that's going to be important, having those skills at, it's not the big mega contractor, but how do they engage, right? How do they engage with Tom, with your group, or, Andy with yours? I mean, what do you do to bring them in, and how do they get to build relationships with you?
So we'll have customer relations groups in all of our service territories that know who to talk to. And so when we get a project in an area, a couple things we require are that a certain percentage of the contractors buy is local.
Okay.
And then the other is show us your plan of how you're going to promote and recruit from the community. And then our community relations will team them up to the people in the community that can help them set things up, and they'll get them for job fairs, make them aware of what's coming, when it's coming, how long it's going to last, what type of trades they're looking for.
Great. And Tom, you had mentioned that you were, working and establishing small business group relationships as well. Any additional things that you're doing?
Nothing more than what I mentioned about trying to get out to the community and
Okay.
work with them and find those firms that we can help bring in and achieve the project goals of small business targets.
Great. And Steve?
Well, I have to admit that Toyota doesn't do a very good job with that part. We have minority requirements in our contract, a certain percentage. I mean, that's been like that forever. But like with what you were saying with community outreach and here's these programs and these companies that you can use, like we kind of give it to the contractor, like go find them. We don't do a very good job of supporting that activity. So I've got some homework to do on that one.
Okay. And okay, so now let me ask you about crisis management. And Andy, I know you have experience with this, with all the hurricanes and then the Carolinas and the floods, and you've got to get people out there and get things up and running immediately. And then, of course, the wildfires out in LA. How do you, from an owner's perspective for the group, what do you see as your vendors and contractors' role trying to get things back to operational for the public and to be able to meet that?
So with hurricanes and such, as a utility, we have mutual aid agreements with most others. And so when a storm's coming, they'll have the contacts, be communicating, set up staging areas, look at the path. We've got a full team of meteorologists that communicate and work with the local meteorologists, with the National Weather Service, and kind of talk and look and see what's the path. Then they'll say, okay, based on the path, here's where our staging area is going to be. If you look at these last hurricanes that came through, there was the one that came up through Florida, through the Big Bend area, went out into the Gulf, to the Atlantic, came back in through North Carolina, and then came on up through the Midwest, hit Indiana, Ohio. So we had all three of our service areas impacted with one storm. But we were able to, because of the mutual aid and the planning, work and try to, and had, with that storm, we had, I want to say 95 to 99% of the customers back with service within 7 days. The other thing is our POG group, which is our transmission distribution, following every storm event, they'll get together and have a debrief and come up with lessons learned, what do we need to change, where were the gaps, and work. And it's not just transmission distribution, like the one that hit Western Carolina, customer relations were involved. Our aviation department was highly involved. One of the things they realized is we had guys out there working, left their families that were impacted, and asking for time off after a week or so, saying, hey, look, I gotta get my family out, they don't have any more food. Within 24 hours, the aviation department had both planes loaded up with meals, got it to Asheville, and had logistics already set up, and it got delivered not just to the families of our employees, but everybody in the area.
Well, that's great. Great. In like Exxon, I mean, if you lost a facility in a storm or a wildfire, do you have the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, so I've got a personal experience from Hurricane Ike where we put a chem plant under 10 feet of water. And I had recently did a major project there, and I was invited to come back. Invited, I use the word loosely. And they said, can you bring your own paper, pens, and computer, because we don't have anything. But from a staging standpoint, you know, we have things, very similar things as far as, okay, generator capability and that, where are they being staged and for response to those kind of things. We have contracts in place to cover those things. And then we have some emergency response facilities, which is a converted horse trailer with satellite linked, et cetera. So you can move in offices, move in things like that to get things back very quickly. But that comes down to, like in that case, it's really partnership with your contractors. So we had like a nationwide call on electricians. So working with the unions, et cetera, was that was a key partnership of being able to bring in the workforce, skilled workforce, to manage that type, because everything under 10 feet had to be replaced, basically. motors, pumps, wires, instruments, etc. The control rooms were gone, so we built control rooms in trailers while we were rebuilding the main control room. But it's having those partnerships with suppliers, contractors, and that up front that's really the key to being able to mobilize. One is prepared, but two is having those partnerships in place was really the key.
Great. Steve, Tom, any comments?
Not a lot of experience. I just know we're smarter squid before my time. Facilities in Puerto Rico and hurricanes, basically you run in island mode with generators and whatever resources you have there until you can get the grid back up. But other than that, closest I came to was a tornado came through Cincinnati. I don't know, Greg, that was quite a few years ago. It came through Cincinnati that wiped out one of our warehouses, so we just had to pivot to other inventory.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you from a wildfire standpoint, in California, how they're going to get back up and operational. I mean, they're going to need manpower. They're going to need places to stay. They're going to need supplies. They're going to need people because you have a lot of people displaced and there's no hotel rooms. When we think of that, of course, we worry about construction. How are you going to fulfill in a good quality manner working in those environments, right? And make sure that people are getting what they need as soon as possible. And those are all challenges that I think that we're facing more and more given the natural disasters that are taking place. Jessica, from your perspective, do you have anything to offer on that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was joking that you didn't know you did sit next to me before, right? From an insurance perspective, it makes it hard to insure when we know that anybody who's touched something potentially has the ability to be brought into a suit. So it's just really trying to figure out what the best way is for us all to understand what the contractual requirements look like. Are our contractors prepared? How are they involved? Part of the thing that you were talking about before with labor too is like, how are we bringing all these people together? Where are they staying when they're being the labor? Things from an insurance perspective we're thinking about. I forget what the stats are because I haven't looked them up in a long time, and I'm sure that people are more versed in this than me, but there's a wildfire in I think every state. I know that we have pockets of things, but like those are things that we're trying to think more and more about, which I'm sure you guys are too, about where can I build something to be out of a path, or how do I get the emergency response to be able to provide relief from something? And we talked about the data centers earlier today too, right? What are we going to do and how are we going to fix it and whose responsibility is it going to be? And so all those things go around in our heads when we're thinking about business resiliency and how we're going to make sure that we can continue to function. Do we have the ability to go to a different warehouse? Do we have the ability to bring in a group from a different place and make sure that all those things are going on when we're preparing to build something and or when we're dealing with natural disaster?
Okay, thank you. So I'll just ask this one last question to the group before I turn it over to Greg. What new developments or expectations do you have for contractors and vendors that you did not have a few years ago? Is there anything that's changed from a contractor and vendor standpoint that you would expect?
One of the positive changes for us is we were very intrusive, and we would have no problem telling you how to do your work. We would almost have as many people as you had, just so we could watch everything. And so we've backed off of that, completely changed our contractor oversight model, and our expectation is that you do what you agreed to do in the manner you agreed to do it.
And has that?
And it's been successful.
Good.
Because I think with us, with that original model, we were getting in the way and it was making things cost more.
Okay.
So it has opposite. Yeah, we are intrusive back then and now. Yeah, so we'll tell you how many feet of pipe you needed to have yesterday and what are you doing about it tomorrow. We gotta talk. Let's see if it's more productive that way. I think my team will be very happy if we kind of let the reins go out a little bit. So.
Is that from the now I'm just being a dork, is that from like a Six Sigma perspective? So like, you're like, we know this process, you guys aren't doing the things that we would expect you to do? Is that why?
Yeah, I think, well, maybe we were less intrusive maybe 10 years ago. It was like, I'd go on a job site and we'd have handover like in 2 weeks. But my PM would have no idea if they're gonna make it. So then it's like, okay, we're not just managing the handover date, it's the whole schedule, right? So you should be able to tell us like the first part of the job, you're on time. So we kind of like fix that, but like on steroids. So it's very controlled, very documented.
Yeah, I would say we're trying to move to more industry standards and looking at, it's not so much that we backed off on the requirements in that, it's more, let's do a gap assessment between what our expectations are and what you have. And if you're meeting the intents and attributes of what we're looking for, then we don't really have the value proposition to say change. So use what you got. If we see a significant gap or see a big opportunity on what we know, bring it into the party, then say, look, we think there's a good opportunity for you in this space to, advance what you do. The other thing, though, what is different, I guess, is earlier we touched on technology. If we're trying to use new technologies, I think it's very difficult and a lot of times to make the value case to a contractor to invest in that technology that says, hey, yeah, ExxonMobil would like you to use this. Nobody else is asking me, why am I investing in the technology just for you? Sure, I'll invest in it. You pay for it all.
Right.
I got my hand up for you giving me the stuff, that's fine. But in a lot of those type of opportunities, like we believe there's efficiency doing inspection of the tanks with drones instead of putting people in the tanks. Okay? To get there, we would drive that technology until it gets accepted enough that they see the productivity improvement and they can take over using that on future jobs. Artificial intelligence, we talk about life-altering injuries. Okay? I can only put so many people, the contractor can only put so many people in the field. Can I, with cameras and artificial technology, see when I've got workers in close proximity to moving equipment, where I have people underneath loads, where I had people not tied off properly at height and that? Can I see that using artificial technology and alert people of that? Right now, I would say it's maybe yes, maybe no. But to ask a contractor to take that over for us, where we think it's high value in the future, but needs some development opportunity, we believe we have to invest in that upfront, as opposed to trying to get the multiple contractors that work for us and that to invest in that technology. And then some of that technology, as it advances, needs to become more standard and be offered more in the market. But whether it's VR technology, other AI technology that we use for, part of our AWP process that the contractors use, it marries very well with that for complex work, not necessarily for every piece of pipe we put in, but looking at where is that application. But a lot of that development opportunity in the field, I believe, has to be driven by us as opposed to pushing it off on the contractor and then having them determine whether it's a value or not.
Great. Right. Anybody else before I turn this over to Greg and he can come and do the Q&A? I am going to go and sit down at the end.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, panelists, for a very insightful presentation. We do have time for a few questions, and 18 came in, so here are a few of them. As owners, do you include a review of the risk to the workers on site as you work with your design team? An example would be reducing the amount of critical picks for the structural phase of a project, for example. Who wants to field that one? And by the way, I think that Steve and Andy ought to probably have a little sidebar and find out how much oversight's optimal and then come back and report to us what they found out. You know, the same hot water that softens the carrot hardens the egg. Think about it. I know. Okay, who wants to field the question?
Can you repeat it?
Do you remember what the question
Thinking about
was?
that.
He's still thinking about the eggs and the carrots. As an owner, do you include a review of the risk to the workers on site as you work with your design team? So do you take in, and maybe that's one for Exxon or Andy, either one,
I'll
go
jump
for
in.
it.
So I would say no. However, if we know of risk from lessons learned, we'll typically include it in our design basis. When you get into lifting and rigging and other what we call high-risk activities, we put a requirement in of what we call a critical evolution, and that's where it's got to have a written plan. It's reviewed by Duke. All our functional managers are part of a call to challenge it, just to make sure the plan is going to be successful before they execute.
Yeah, and then for Toyota, like our structural steel projects, when we work with the design firms, we have requirements of no double connection. We have a steel Kanban, which is our commissioning process, to try to design this structure as safe as possible to be erected. So with double connections, right, you have to have everything line up perfectly, right? And we use subpart R from OSHA to kind of help guide the design on that. And but yeah, just that's the biggest thing for design is the steel side.
Staying with Toyota, Toyota is well known for efficiency, safety, and productivity in manufacturing. When you work with your building partners to provide feedback, how is the most effective way and what areas of improvement have been most noticeable?
Feedback.
You know, these are brave people up there to take these kind of arrows. These are hard questions, and these are organic questions. And I'm also giving him some time to think of his answer.
So I think with, as talked about before, with contractors and building relationships, you know, I've had several meetings with others after projects. Feedback in terms of productivity, on that I mentioned before, our visual tracking of productivity, we call it Kamishibai, where we kind of develop a plan and track it every day and make sure that we're staying course. It's getting buy-in from the contractors. Why am I doing this? Why are you making me fill out this form? Kind of like you mentioned about the value add. So we do it first to show them that like we kind of help prevent the rework of projects, and kind of the sooner you get done, you get your money, and we move on to the next project. We can hire you again. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we've done. That steel Kanban process had a lot of buy-in from our steel contractors. That was another big feedback and kind of an alliance on building that system. And then also our safety program. We have an annual safety meeting with all our general contractor safety, all of our Toyota safety reps, and kind of do this. You know, we call it a Nimawashi, where we kind of share ideas and what's going on, and sharing with each other what things are going well.
Let me ask you this question. What do you see as the future of the industry? How have we improved remarkably in your tenure with the construction industry, and what do you see as possible on the horizon for really terrific improvement in our industry overall? It's a great closing question since we only have a minute and a half. Who wants to tether that one first? What's been the most remarkable step forward improvement in the last several years, and where do you see us going in the future that you're excited about?
Well, I've seen what I liked recently is Dusty the robot on our project in San Diego is amazing. They actually stepped up and added another one that's laying out all the walls, laying out hanger points, laying out the equipment where the lab stuff's going to go, and that's all being done on the floor in advance, and it's for all trades. So there's like one quadrant, there's like 900 points that it's out there, and it's running every day, and that leads into the Revit and BIM model. Then we're going to life cycle. That's a new adventure that we're getting into. We want to life cycle that model over to operations. reliability, excellence, and run a life cycle on that. So that's just a little segment of what kind of technology is allowing us to do. So there's some of our partners are embracing it. We just got to be smart enough to ask them what they're already doing that we want them to give us at the end. So
Sounds like a great case study for this time next year in Florida.
yes.
So mark him down, Greg.
Maybe.
Who else has a comment or two about the step changes you've seen that have been encouraging, and where do you see the future going?
First one I'll hit on is AWP. When it first came out, a lot of people talked about it. They just weren't really doing it. When they say they are, and you talk to the guys in the field and think, oh yeah, well, we were supposed to do it in this sequence, but we thought we'd be more efficient. We decided to change. That's why they're not doing it. The other area I would say is the utilization of drones for employee safety.
For employees.
So as Wayne hit on, for tank inspections, for us, boiler inspections. I don't have to scaffold the boiler. Stack inspections, transmission line inspections. We've got some pretty nasty terrain that has transmission lines going through it. And if I can send something without a person and find out exactly where the issue is, I don't put them at risk trying to find it on foot.
Great insight. Someone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, for me, I guess the thing that's been exciting the last couple of years is Toyota's buy-in with BIM. The BIM, so we're doing digital twin, factory digital twin, which we're trying to get all of the process shops in our BIM model. So then if we have an expansion, we don't get surprised by process installing a tank at a wall where we thought it was going to be empty. And then also kind of expanding on that going forward is doing as-built with walking with a camera and just being able to easily track it, and do the daily tracking as I mentioned before. It's going to be pretty exciting.
So far it's been technology, and new improvements. Anybody else want to weigh in before we ring the bell?
Well, I'll take it a little different. I'd say one of the big areas is focus on human performance. And I say that by when I started, when I was doing project management, I'm guilty, that somebody was breaking a rule. We had a very simple method. Contractor, a lot of times we go to the investigation, and where's the individual? He's already gone. We know you're going to get rid of him, so we just did it ahead of time. So we bring somebody else in. It wasn't the person, it was the systems, it was the tools, infrastructure, the whole 50 other reasons that were driving it, so we do it again. I think there's been a much greater recognition of understanding from the human performance perspective and the drive to understand the human performance perspective with our contractors to look for what's really the root problems and trying to solve the root problem, not the individual. And the tagline is, how do we help them get it right versus get it wrong? It's not because they're trying to do wrong. In many cases, it's because the underlying systems and tools can be improved to drive better performance.
What a great point to end on. In addition to technology, there's always the human factor, the human performance factor, and Wayne, you teed that up grandly. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask the panel to stay up here for a few minutes because there were 18 questions that we didn't get to, and perhaps for just a moment or two, you may want to come ahead and ask your questions of this fine panel of resources. Let's show our appreciation before we leave.